Hope you're doing good. Back in action here with another piece of content. Thanks to Richard Garner for filling in while I was away. Let's get right to this one. What happened here is I've been sent a video many times over the last week or so, and it's, this is a video about Bill Gates. It's been going viral all over social media. Let's just take a quick look at it so we know what we're talking about.
Point we didn't really understand the fatality rate. We didn't understand that it's a fairly low fatality rate and that it's a disease mainly of the elderly, kind of like flu is, although a bit different than that. So that was a pretty scary period.
So obviously this has been going around a lot. It's been used in other people's videos as they talk about and do commentary on stuff. There's one of Jimmy Dore here doing some commentary on this particular video. And I myself was about to do a piece of content on this and bring to the table some thoughts and feelings I had until I did my due diligence and started looking into this a little bit more deeply and realized that there's some stuff being taken out of context here, and it's very important for us to consider and look at. Now, just before we get into that, be sure to subscribe to the channel and make sure that you turn on all notifications so you can get all of our future content here as we continue to hope to make sense of things that are going on in our world. That's it, that's all. Ultimately, we're seeing what looks like catching Bill Gates red-handed. I mean, he's saying at the end of the day, we knew that this whole thing was a low infection fatality rate. It was a disease of the elderly. So then why did we go through with all the measures and the vaccines and all the things that we did? Why did we do all that if guys like him and his foundation and other people out there that have influence, if they knew that, why did all this happen? Well, this is a tricky conversation because this particular clip, which was shot in May, he's talking to CNN's Fareed Zakaria. When I looked at the actual source footage of this and you wheel back just a little bit, you start to realize he's talking about a meeting he had in very early February of 2020.
We were in for a global thing. It wasn't until early February when I was in a meeting that experts at the foundation said, there's no way, there's been too much travel without diagnosis for us to contain this. And then at that point, we didn't really understand the fatality rate. We didn't understand that it's a fairly low fatality rate and that it's a disease mainly of the elderly.
So the first question you have to ask yourself when you're going through this is, what did we know about the infection fatality rate in very early 2020? So, which would be February. So I decided to go to Worldometers, who had been kind of tracking a lot of these details over the past, I guess the entire time that COVID was going on. And I went to the Internet Wayback Machine, which is essentially a way to check the Internet archives. You start to see that there are a number of different screenshots of these people trying to track through all the different data around the world, trying to track the infection fatality rate of COVID in some of the early days. And if you look at, some of the dates in very late January of 2020 and in very early February of 2020, you start to see that they were basically estimating an infection fatality rate of about 2%. And they're being very clear, like this is a very early estimate. Some that they were, generating themselves, some that came from data from the World Health Organization, but they didn't really know. And the reason why they didn't really know was because this was primarily only being seen in Wuhan in China. We know that there's a ton of data problems in China, and nobody could understand quite right away that early what exactly was going on. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment if you just look at what public information there was available. Now, if you want to bring in the entire discussion of, was this thing generated in a lab and did they know what the infection fatality rate would have been based on all that stuff in the lab and blah, blah, that's a whole separate conversation that I don't think any of us can really come to a truth or come to answers on, because guess what? That's something that we don't have access to. And for the most part, nobody's even really acknowledging en masse whether or not that entire theory is true, which if you were to ask me, it's probably pretty likely. But just looking at the information we had available and then saying to, looking at Bill Gates' statement, was he correct in saying that in early February, they didn't really know what the infection fatality rate was? Yes, they didn't really know back at that time. Now, did we know by, say, the end of March 2020 or early April 2020, when they started to do lockdowns to figure things out and they started actually tracking and they started gathering data and making sense of that data, which can take a long time? Yeah, probably by about April or May, somewhere in there, we probably had some pretty solid data, and that's even what we reported on here at The Pulse. And to write those pieces, we had preprint studies like this that came out April 17th, 2020, where we see that the infection fatality rate is lower than 2%. And then by May 19th, 2020, we realize here in another preprint from John P.A. Ioannidis, this time solely, where again he's concluding that the infection fatality rate is very low, much lower than the 2% previously assumed back in February. But looking at that Bill Gates, hey, we caught him red-handed piece, this looks like we got him. He's admitting that this is a disease of the elderly and that this is the infection fatality rate is super low, but they didn't know that back in February of 2020. So this piece is being taken out of context in a number of ways. And, I was hesitant to even produce this piece because immediately the first thing that happens is, oh, well, the Pulse has sold out, the Pulse is a shill, the Pulse is this, the Pulse is that. You guys are just trying to protect people. No, our interest here at the Pulse and everything we've ever done for the past 14 years is what is the truth? How do we actually move forward? And how do we create situations where people are actually interested in determining what the truth is and doing this as a community? So instead of being in ideological pods where we're all just trying to fight for our own, hey, how can I find the best piece of evidence to support my position that I've already decided upon? And even if something comes that upends what I believe, I'm just going to ignore it. Right? Instead of taking that route, which is, kind of what has us in this mess right now of everybody just trying to hold and maintain their position, we start seeing stuff like this happen where, anything that can go viral is going to go viral. And even though it's not entirely true, hey, it kind of looks like it really supports my perspective. But then the challenge there, of course, is that this is extremely easy to debunk. It took me all of about 6 minutes to determine that this clip is being slightly taken out of context. And again, I want to say this to reiterate, it doesn't mean that those things aren't true. Yes, the infection fatality rate is very low. And yes, the elderly are primarily the people that are struggling with COVID-19. And that probably none of the measures that have been put in place needed to happen. And on top of that, the Great Barrington Declaration and that entire approach was probably the correct approach that should have happened. But yet we all know Anthony Fauci went and sought to actually take down the scientists that were promoting the Great Barrington Declaration, which again, to me, that is better evidence to look at. That is better evidence to have conversations about when we want to talk about this sort of thing. What's really going on with COVID? What's happening? Let's utilize the solid evidence, not the sort of, cheap clips that we see go around social media sometimes that are often taken out of context. Now, why does this happen on social media? Why does this get taken out of context? Obviously, this is a very easy mistake to make, right? To not see the other 15 seconds prior to where Bill Gates is talking about how this happened in early February. Super easy mistake to make. Everything looks super legit about this video. Why would we even assume that we have to go back 15 seconds? Well, the challenge is we have to look at how most content creators are incentivized today. Whether you're on Instagram, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on YouTube, it doesn't really matter. The incentive is you need more views, you need more likes, you got to make your money, and you want to build your account. In fact, that's been one of the largest challenges that's happened since we've been in this game for the last 14 years is you see a lot of people making decisions about their content based on how it's going to get the most views or how it's going to make the most money. And this can very, very quickly become a trap because not only are you now trying to please your audience the entire time, but you're actually trying to basically stay alive as a business because your incentive is to keep driving up the likes. So you start cutting corners. You start seeing, well, all of my other competitors are sharing this clip about Bill Gates. I better get in on that because it is going viral right now and I want to cash in on that too. And this process of incentivization that happens through social media is also sometimes what can fuel, the pushing of this type of stuff. Now, this is just one example of so many we've seen over the course of COVID-19, things that have gone incredibly viral that everybody's like, why aren't you covering this? Why aren't you covering this? To which our response has been, because it's not true, right? And the challenge is that what this does is, although it seems like it's, hey, more truth is being spread and more truth is being uncovered, what's actually happening is this is producing a breakdown in the overall communication because on one side, let's say the mainstream side, you have this, we don't want to look into anything unless it comes from government or trusted sources. We don't want to look into it because, we're just not allowed to do that. Mainstream media right now, everybody's kind of pushed into this like very tight box of you're not allowed to talk about or question anything that the government does or says, especially related to COVID-19. So that's on one side. And on the other side, there's this complete lack of trust. And everybody is going, well, let's just find the thing that kind of upends the entire mainstream narrative. And at the end of the day, to move forward as a collective, these two groups need to learn how to talk to each other. They need to learn how to respect each other, and they need to learn how to move in a direction that allows us to collectively sense make, right? So how do you do that? Well, you need to use quality pieces of evidence, quality pieces of content to get there. And sure, sometimes on either side, even a quality piece of content, a quality piece of evidence will be ignored. But every single time either side presents something that can very easily be debunked, trust is lost through each other. Meaning now this group over here that presents, say, a side that is, well, I debunked this in 6 minutes. Well, now the mainstream side has even less reason to trust what's coming out of this side because it appears as though all they're trying to do is ideologically prove their point, not actually seek what the truth is. So I know this feels in some way, shape, or form like I'm kind of picking on a basic example, but the theory behind this is really what I'm trying to get at. Is I feel that we kind of need to do, both as content creators and news and organizations, but as well as viewers, a bit of a better job of not having such knee-jerk reactions to pieces of content and maybe thinking about them, feeling them out a little bit more before we share them so much, right? Now, I know this also sounds like it goes along with the idea of, oh, fake news is taking over the internet. Well, let's just put fake news aside for a second, because the reality is you're going to find fake news across the entire spectrum of media, in alternative and independent and all in mainstream media. You're going to see it everywhere. So it kind of becomes a moot point to talk about it. What is more valuable to talk about is just taking that moment, right? When we say at the beginning of all of our articles on The Pulse to take a moment, take a breath, set your pulse, relax your body, take a moment to just kind of tune into your environment. The purpose of that is to kind of remove some of that emotional reaction, remove that quick like, hey, I'm consuming content, need to share it, need to prove to my friends what I feel, I need to prove my point, Everybody kind of seems to be in some way, shape, or form doing that. I shouldn't say everybody, but lots of people are doing that right now. In the nature of social media, the nature of YouTube, the nature of content these days is that we're consuming so much and taking very little time to really think about and feel out content, where we kind of need to turn that model on its head. Maybe look at less content and really think a little bit more deeply about some of that content. And I think that will lead us towards creating a world where we are making sense of things a little better, where we can look at situations like this and not potentially do the damage of losing the trust in the people that we're really trying to reach, right? Because that's, again, what's happening here is trust is being lost in conversation because so many bad examples of what's going on are being used to try and prove our points. But yet out there is tons and tons and tons of really solid, strong evidence to prove the points that we need to be proving in order to have a discussion with each other in a way that becomes undeniable, that moves us towards collective sense making. So ultimately what I'm trying to say with this piece of content is take a moment, take a breath before and as we are consuming content, thinking about them a little bit more clearly, thinking about them a little bit more. And I guess just reminding yourself, creators are incentivized for virality. They're not incentivized for truth. So as viewers and as users of social media, we have to remember that, and we have to take a moment to step back and say, hold on, just because this is going viral doesn't mean it's true. How can we take a second to really check this and see what's going on? That's it, that's all. It's good to be back. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, share this video around, and we'll catch you next time.